Pakistan's economy, and what is the outlook after the present election?
I can relate to 3 or 4 policy priorities. The first one is to have a fiscal system based on tough enforcement of tax laws.
$1 million of debt payments. We have to 24 billion Pakistani rupees of payments we have to make, and in the next 3 years, we're making 74 billion rupees of payments just to IMF.
That proper economic management, and it should begin with a major change in the fiscal system and make people take the tax system seriously.
That's a good excuse to sort of not grow and stay at or beneath the 4% level, to sort of not have depletion of foreign exchange reserves and expanding current account deficits.
Tax to GDP ratio is very low in Pakistan. We are a very corrupt society. हमारे जो well-to-do people हैं, they would rather send their money to Dubai, Qatar, and so on, rather than spend it in Pakistan on things that would help Pakistan. Reform the fiscal system, increase the investment rate, and increase investment in productive activities which produce goods and services not only for domestic consumption, but also for exports.
Right.
Take care of education and training of the youth in Pakistan.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Joining me today is Mr. Shahid Javed Burki, former finance minister of Pakistan, arguably one of Pakistan's most celebrated and most successful economists. Burki Saab has written more than 24 books about Pakistan and has had extensive experience at the World Bank, eventually becoming vice president at the World Bank and then serving as Pakistan's finance minister in the 90s. Burki Saab has set up an institute in Lahore called the Burki Institute of Public Policy, which has been functioning since 2007 and has published a number of reports modeled after World Bank's State of the Economy reports called the State of the Economy reports at the Burki Institute of Public Policy. They've published a report this year as well, which focuses on governance. So our roundup includes talking to Shahid Javed Burki Saab about the report, and also perhaps about Pakistan's economy and what is the outlook after the present election. So let me first welcome Shahid Javed Burki Saab. Assalamu alaikum, sir. I hope you're doing well.
Well, lovely to see you again and great to talk to you. You had said to me that you would like to do this on a regular basis, but you never came back.
Yes, I'm in the US these days, and I've just started a PhD program, so got immersed in the program with. But I'd hopefully take out more time for it starting next year.
I have started work, which will be published in my weekly column. You know, I do a column every Monday, comes out in Express Tribune.
Yes.
So I am doing a column which will come out in the next couple of weeks. This is on the policy priorities of the people who are now taking over the various administrations. So इसमें I can relate to 3 or 4 policy priorities. The first one is to have a fiscal system based on tough enforcement of tax laws. यहाँ पाकिस्तान में लोग taxes नहीं pay करते. They would rather spend it in restaurants and so on, and not give the government the money that they owe the government. मैं एक example देता हूँ आपको. Once my wife and I went to a store in Islamabad, and she was buying a lot of pashmina shawls. So the store was run by a Hindu who belongs to Sindh and smuggles pashmina from India. एंड फिर वो इस्लामाबाद ला के अपनी दुकान है उसकी बेचता है. तो इसने मेरी बीवी ने काफ़ी पैसा खर्चा टू बाय दीज शॉल्स एज तोहफास प्रेजेंट्स फॉर पीपल बैक होम इन वॉशिंगटन. तो मैंने इसको कहा, मैंने कहा देखो ये मेरी बेगम काफ़ी पैसा लगा रही है, तुम पक्की रसीद देना. तो मुझे कहते हैं सर सुपर पक्की रसीद, बट आपका ख्याल है कि मैंने टैक्स पे करना है, सवाल ही नहीं पैदा होता. एंड ही सेड गो टू एनी ऑफ द शॉप्स अराउंड हियर, उनसे पूछ लें, इफ दे आर ऑनेस्ट दे विल टेल यू दैट दे डोंट पे टैक्स. तो इस किस्म का अगर एटीट्यूड हो टुवर्ड्स द फिस्कल सिस्टम, तो कहाँ से पैसे आएंगे गवर्नमेंट को to do the things that all governments must do. And one of the priorities uh, of the governments that are taking office is female empowerment. My institution over here wrote a report on this. यहाँ औरतों की जो सिचुएशन है बड़ी खराब है, and unless that is improved, our rate of growth of population will not come down. Bangladesh has given a very good example that if you have women employment, that affects the rate of fertility. Is वक्त Pakistan's population is 240 million. Bangladesh's population is 170 million. At the time Pakistan was born, when Bangladesh was a part of Pakistan, Bangladesh had more people than we had. So their situation has improved because women are employed in making of garments. And garment industry is very big in Bangladesh, and it has given independence to women. They can decide what kind of partners they want, how many children they want, and so on. वो हमारे यहाँ अभी ये चीज नहीं आई. So that has to be a top priority. So better management of the fiscal system, empowerment of women, and then training of the youth of Pakistan in performing basic services that are in demand outside the country. And here I'm referring to information technology activities. I'm sure you know this. Pakistan has one of the youngest populations in the world.
Yes.
हमारी जो median age है, median age is the age below which 50% of the population is, and the remaining 50% is above that age. Pakistan has one of the lowest median ages in the world, 20.4 years, which means that 120 million people are below the age of 20.4. इन बच्चों को, लड़कियों को, लड़कों को, we must give them proper education and give them training so that they can begin to participate in modern technology, not only for use in the country, but also for export. So these are some of the priorities that I will push on the new people who are coming to power.
Sir, thank you for a very elaborate answer. And this sounds like very exciting work that you're beginning to do. My idea for this interview is that, you've done very extensive work on Pakistan's economies, perhaps in the last 5 decades. And for the younger generations who've not read a lot of work that you've done, and I know that you say this, that, the younger generation that you talk about doesn't have a habit of reading. So my idea for this interview is to sort of take your ideas that you've been espousing in a lot of work that you've done over the past many years, especially to the younger generation. So I'll just ask a few pointed questions about Pakistan's economy. Sir, you just talked about taxes. One of the major issues that the Ministry of Finance is facing right now is that the debt servicing payments are so high, and Pakistan has been breaching something called the Fiscal Debt Limitations Act, which said that public debt should not be more than 60% of the GDP, and it's now ranging around 80% of the GDP, or even perhaps more. The big problem that Ministry of Finance now faces in terms of the fiscal system is that the taxes that we collect, and it's of course meager taxes that the government collects, are just spent on servicing the debt. And then the entire development and non-development expenditure has to then be financed through more debt. And that's the problem that all governments that would come in the future would eventually face. Do you think that there is like an ultimate solution to this, and or we would perhaps just be caught in this vicious cycle of debt forever?
I agree with you.
Yeah, next 3 years, I was just looking at data today, sir. Pakistan has to service 74, um, just in the next 3 months, I think 24 uh, million dollars of debt payments. 24 billion Pakistani rupees of payments we have to make. And in the next 3 years, we're making 74 billion rupees of payments just to IMF. And,
Dekho,
and
my view is that proper economic management, and it should begin with a major change in the fiscal system and make people take the tax system seriously and not avoid जिस तरह ये दुकान वाला मुझे कह रहा था कि कोई नहीं पे करता. So it is quite reasonable to expect that within about 4 to 5 years, Pakistan can achieve a sustainable rate of growth of 6 to 7% a year, which would bring it to the level that East Asian miracle economies achieved over a very long period of time. But that would mean, are you familiar with Harrod-Domar model?
yes, sir. Yes.
Harrod-Domar is a very simple model. You divide the rate of investment by something called ICOR, incremental capital output ratio.
Yes.
मेरा ख्याल है कि पाकिस्तान का incremental capital output ratio is around 4. So to achieve a 6% rate of growth, multiply 6 by 4, you need an investment rate of about 24% of GDP. Is वक्त investment rate is around half of that. So that has to be increased, and the only way it can be increased is to give people absolutely no choice but to pay taxes and increase the revenues of the government. And second is get people to spend money on things that would improve their own situation and that of the economy. मैं पाकिस्तान जब आता हूँ तो मैं देखता हूँ कि if I travel on Lahore Islamabad motorway, every third car is an expensive SUV. So people are spending on luxury goods. People are spending on themselves. They are not spending on investing in the future of their own children or improving the lot of the economy. And this thing needs to be done.
Sir, a quick question about that too. I don't know if you've heard this, but this was really debated in the media when Miftah Ismail became finance minister. He said that since Pakistan is an import-driven economy, and much of what we produce is basically produced through imported energy, the economy begins to heat up if we move higher than 4% of annual growth rate. And essentially, what that means is that any additional growth contributes more to deficits than they contribute to the economy. And he believes that that's the reason why we have twin deficits. We firstly have budget deficits, and then budget deficits give into the current account deficit. Do you think that that's like, I mean, that's a good excuse to sort of not grow and stay at or beneath the 4% level to sort of not have depletion of foreign exchange reserves and expanding current account deficits?
देखें, tax to GDP ratio is very low in Pakistan. We are a very corrupt society. हमारे जो well-to-do people हैं, they would rather send their money to Dubai, Qatar, and so on, rather than spend it in Pakistan on things that would help Pakistan. Incredible amount of money is going out of the country, and some of it is corrupt money, some of it is their own money, which they then convert into foreign currencies. So this is not the right way of running a government. People should be punished if they are doing this kind of thing.
Right. So
corruption बहुत है.
But sir, I was looking at, one of the, I would just run this past you. One of the another argument about the economy is that Pakistan has low marginal savings rates and we consume a lot, which is the reason why we have expanding current account deficits. But then if you look at marginal savings rates in Pakistan, they're not much below other countries with the same level of development, perhaps because of the reason that people don't pay taxes here. Do you think that the issue is to have higher savings rates, which could then convert into investment? Or do you think the issue is to have the same marginal savings rates, but perhaps people should pay a higher amount of taxes? Because even if we look at tax rates, the rates themselves are quite harmonized with other countries with the same level of development. It's just that the FBR doesn't have capacity to collect.
Your suggestion that Pakistan's saving rate is reasonable, that is not correct. Pakistan's saving rate is very low. I saw a study done by a think tank in Europe, which looked at savings rate in Pakistan and came to the conclusion that it is one of the lowest in the world. And this study then looked at what are people spending their money on. So मैंने already कहा कि अगर ये main highways पे जाएं तो incredible amount of incredible number of SUVs you find on the road. तो कारों पे पैसा खर्चा जा रहा है. ये जो स्टडी यूरोपियंस ने की है वो है कि बहुत पैसा रियल एस्टेट में जाता है. People are buying land, buying houses. These are not productive investments. These are people are consuming that way. And unless you tax this kind of consumption at a painful rate, people are not going to spend money on what needs to be done in order to improve the Pakistan's economic situation.
Sir, I was recently at the finance ministry, and one of the biggest problems that all finance ministers were facing, and you've been finance minister in the past, is that if the government increases the energy tariff, you are directly in a conflict with the textile industry, which now, of course, is a major contributor to exports, and they start shutting off if the government increases the energy tariff. The other problem is if you increase the tax rates, especially on the industrial sector, especially on the textile sector, again, the government runs a potential conflict with the textile sector. And over the past few years, the big problem is that the textile sector says that if you increase the tax rate or increase the energy tariff, we would stop operating because we're already very uncompetitive, especially to comparative countries like Bangladesh that we have to compete with. Now, the big problem is that the trade-off that every finance minister now faces is that you either run these fiscal deficits, or if you don't, you then start losing because they stop exporting, and you have a foreign exchange problem. If industries stop exporting, you lose out on the potential foreign exchange. And now I think this trade-off has become a big problem for all finance ministers to face. When Ishaq Dar was recently finance minister, he was essentially uh, negotiating with the textile industry. He gave them a lot of subsidies, but at the same time, he gave them export targets which none of them met. So, so the problem that Pakistan now faces is very grave, and I don't know. I mean, no economist in Pakistan seems to have a solution.
Uh, I know Isaac Dar reasonably well.
Yes.
मैंने इसको एक दफा कहा कि you are keeping the value of the rupee low in order for people like you and your friends and so on and so forth to transfer money out of Pakistan at a rate that suits you. And I said, this is not acceptable. So mujhe kehta hai, I don't like this comment. And I said, this comment was made not for you to like it, but this is what is happening in this country.
I think he's still a great believer of an overvalued exchange rate, especially vis-a-vis the US dollar. And he talks about something called the real effective exchange rate. And the REER, everywhere across the world, the REER has become extremely unpopular because it's not a great indicator of the real price of a foreign currency. But since the REER in Pakistan has continuously trailed the market value of the dollar, Ishaq Dar has now become a great fan of the REER because he can use the REER as a basis to tell people that the market rate of the US dollar is more expensive than what it should have been. And he's been using the REER as a pretext to convince people that dollar is more expensive than it should have been. And therefore, the rupee is undervalued.
The rate, rupee dollar rate is determined by the difference between imports and exports. If
Yes.
we are importing more than we can afford and not exporting enough to pay for those imports, the value of the rupee will continue to decline.
Yes.
With the current policies, I would not be surprised if 4 or 5 years from now, the value of the rupee increases to 1,000 rupees per dollar. So that's number one. Number two, एक मैंने स्टडी देखी थी जिसमें real estate holdings of people of Pakistani origin in London is one of the highest in the world. लोग पैसा निकालते हैं पाकिस्तान से, and then they buy very expensive properties in London and Paris and so on. So the incentive systems are such that it encourages this kind of behavior. That has to change, and a government which works on changing the incentives will succeed, and people will begin to see that they are succeeding.
Yes. So essentially, sir, you're pointing towards the disincentives to investment, especially in the industrial sector, right?
Money should go into productive activities, not into consumption. Money should go into setting up businesses and industries and so on, not into buying houses and buying pieces of land and expensive cars and jewelry and that kind of stuff. How can that be done? It can only be done by making things expensive. मुझे एक दफा एक young man who was with me at the World Bank and was the son of a very high level official. मुझे वो बताने लगा, he said, I went to a house that my father had built in Islamabad. And I stayed in that house for a couple of months. And while I was there, the tax bill arrived. And I opened the envelope. And he said, इस घर पे मेरे बाप ने 3-4 करोड़ लगाए थे. You know what was the tax bill? 38,000 rupees. He said, how can you run a government? How can you run a system which allows this kind of escape? That करोड़ों रुपए आप घर पे लगा दें, लेकिन गवर्नमेंट ने टैक्स नहीं करना. Tax system has to be made. मुझे एक दफा when I was leaving the bank, World Bank, हमारी salaries were tax free. World Bank salaries were not taxed. So there were about 15 people who had decided to stay on in the United States, and that included me. So एक आदमी आया, fiscal economist था, fiscal lawyer था, invited by the World Bank to talk to people like myself who were now going to leave the World Bank and start earning their pensions, which are taxable. So वो कहने लगा कि the moment you step out of this building, there is an institution, an American institution called IRS, Internal Revenue Service. That is a agency that you must not play games with. If you do, they will take away everything you have, including your wife. So इस किस्म का जो fear है, वो यहाँ नहीं है. So people get away with it.
Sir, on the idea of industrialization, and I'm really intrigued by the philosophical debates that are carried out about industrialization, and a lot of people think that the model of industrialization that started in the 70s essentially started failing in the recent past when greater focus was laid on poverty and inequality, especially when recent works like Why Nations Fail by Darren Ashmoglu and Capital in the 21st Century, these kinds of works came out which laid greater focus on wealth and inequalities that had been expanding. People thought that the Chinese model of industrialization or the East Asian miracle have started falling apart because industrialization doesn't solve everything, especially in terms of these, expanding inequalities. And now, the Bangladesh model was being cited in our part of the world. They industrialized, their GDP per capita is now greater than both India and Pakistan. But the big question is that, Bangladesh has now decided to go to the IMF, and they're also, having monetary policy issues or like foreign exchange reserves issues for which they now have to go to the IMF. More than a dozen countries are now facing, are vulnerable to defaults, including Pakistan. Do you think that, focus on industrialization as a policy priority is the ultimate thing, or is what Pakistan should pursue as a policy priority?
Meredith, I've already said to you what my priorities are. Reform the fiscal system, increase the investment rate, and increase investment in productive activities which produce goods and services not only for domestic consumption, but also for exports.
Right.
Take care of education and training of the youth in Pakistan, and take care of corruption. People should not, encourage is not the right word. Nobody encourages corruption, but you look the other way. And I am just amazed what people are doing and how they are making money and then sending it outside the country, using it to buy properties in the Middle East and in England and so on.
Sir, just going back to the 60s, and I know I've heard a lot of stories from you directly about how Pakistan was back in that time, and I know a lot of your works and books have focused on the 60s, especially at the time when you were in the civil service. And I know in these 5 years from 1960 to 65, uh, growth was averaging more than 6%. Investment rates were very high, something that Mehboob Haq talks about in Strategy of Economic Planning, his famous book. Um, do you think that the tax system was better in the 60s? Were we doing better in terms of collecting taxes and in terms of investing in the productive sectors? The two things that policy priorities that you talk about that Pakistan must return to now in the present times?
My first book on Pakistan was about Pakistan's economic history.
Yes.
So when I was writing the book, I went to see Ayub Khan. So he had then moved to the house he built close to the hills of Islamabad. तो वहाँ बैठे थे, तो मैंने कहा कि मैं एक किताब लिख रहा हूँ पाकिस्तान की इकोनॉमिक हिस्ट्री पे. So he said, does it cover my period? I said, it covers your period. So he said, what do you think of my period? I said, my view is that your period was a golden age of Pakistan. So he was visibly pleased by that comment. And he said to me, but Zulfi doesn't think so, referring to Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. मैंने कहा जुल्फी ने वो तबाही फेरी है जो आपने अच्छे काम किए थे उसको रिवर्स कर दिया. So you should not be listening to his comments. You should just explain to people what is it that you did which made Pakistan an example for other countries to follow. When I went to Harvard, 3-4 किताबें आई थी which were focused on why Pakistan should be treated as a model by the rest of the developing world. एक किताब थी Gustav Papanek की. Papanek had served as an advisor to the Planning Commission. तो Ayub Khan मुझे कहने लगे कि when I had taken over the government, I got a team sent to Pakistan and to India to ask me and ask Prime Minister Nehru, what is it that the United States could do for these two countries? तो कहते हैं मैंने कहा कि I am not a dictator. I want to follow the advice of experts, which means that I want to build a very strong planning commission. लेकिन हमारे पास economists नहीं है, तो आप हमें help करें to get economists, which led to this agreement between Pakistan and Development Advisory Service of Harvard University, जिसके वो member Papanek वगैरह थे.
Harvard Advisory Group was called the Harvard Advisory Group.
Development Advisory Group, DAS. I worked for them also when I went to Harvard. तो कहते हैं then they went to India. तो Nehru ने कहा कि they told Nehru that this is what Ayub had said. So Nehru said, it doesn't take very long to produce economists. It takes very long to produce technically qualified people. So you set up 4 institutions like MIT in Massachusetts. And so he said they invested in those. So Ayub Khan मुझे कहने लगे, I wish I had done the same thing. Economists like you, ज़्यादा देर नहीं लगती, लेकिन institutions like MIT have changed the face of India. हमारे यहाँ technology has not entered the mainstream. चलिए, अभी that's अब मेरा गला लग रहा है बोल के तो we should conclude.
Okay, sir. Yeah, we can stop here. I wanted to talk about BIP's annual report as well, but we can schedule another
Sure.
interview, perhaps in the next week. Thank you so much for
Sure.
joining, sir, and it was a pleasure, like always.
Nice to see you again. You're looking good.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
thank you.